What's up, y'all? This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Tonight we're shedding some light on use of force from police. Plus, we're showing how new technology has led to a collision of gaming and movie making. Plus, since I'm all alone in here, I don't have to wear a mask for the next half hour, so that's a plus. Here's the latest. It's slowly getting worse for California, Texas, Florida, and a handful of other states seeing a surge in cases of COVID-19. In California, the governor threatened to withhold some state funding to counties that do not enforce the health orders.
When you come into the state of California, you have rules and regulations and health guidelines that have to be enforced, and we expect will be advanced.
Health experts are pushing for a universal mask wearing order in the US, saying it could save 33,000 lives by October. A legal victory for the Trump administration today, as the Supreme Court ruled asylum seekers do not need to be given a federal court hearing before a quick deportation from the country if the asylum seeker failed to prove their life was in danger initially. In the 7-2 vote, the dissenting justices said the ruling greatly increases the risk of mistakes being made in deportation decisions. Just one day after Major League Baseball announced a plan to begin their regular season in July, 3 teams say they had players test positive for COVID-19. The new virus cases on teams from Boston, Detroit, and Seattle won't derail plans to bring back baseball, but it does underscore the difficulties the league faces in creating a safe environment for players. In 2014, Ferguson, Missouri saw protests over the killing of an unarmed black teenager that gained a global spotlight. The next year, in 2015, the FBI said it would start collecting nationwide data on police use of force. Fast forward to today, and we're still waiting for the first year of national data. In this next story, Newsy digs into that missing data set to shed some light on police use of force. Here's Mark Greenblatt.
Shakitha Holman is watching from a distance as police arrest her pregnant daughter. She begins recording from her wheelchair, but that's when a deputy from the Harris County Sheriff's Office orders her to move.
So I turn my wheelchair to leave, but then you pursue me.
Holman rolls back while continuing to record. When she stops to write something down, that's when the same deputy grabs her phone and tosses it, and he begins to force her arm behind her injured back.
I have about probably 7 slip discs in my back.
Holman reaches for the car door, but it's too late. A group of deputies swarm in, pull out a taser, and fire. She passes out, but the deputies are not done.
I'm on the ground, and as soon as I open my eyes now, I'm not fighting you guys. My whole body is going again. I'm just getting tased some more.
It's the kind of incident the Justice Department said in 2016 that it would have the FBI track in a new national database, asking local police to disclose every incident of use of force and provide details such as the race of the people involved. But the request was voluntary, and 4 years later, Newsy has learned that the Harris County Sheriff has yet to provide the FBI any data. They're far from the only ones. The FBI confirms that the majority of police officers do not work at agencies participating in its use of force program, but would not yet name those who did send data. So Newsy surveyed the nation's 10 largest police agencies. Only the LAPD and the Chicago Police confirmed that they did participate in the FBI's new program. The New York State Police and Pennsylvania State Police said they have not yet done so. 6 agencies did not respond to multiple inquiries.
If you don't think that's important to report, what message are you sending to everyone else in your agency? What message are you sending to everyone in your community? That force doesn't matter?
Kevin Robinson teaches criminology at Arizona State University after working 13 years as an assistant chief with the Phoenix PD.
Honestly, you're gathering the information anyway, or at least you should be. Reporting it to me is not that big of a deal.
In the national conversation about police violence and race, there's been a lot of focus on arrest-related deaths. But how often do victims survive? Well, without a national use of force database that's complete, it's difficult to tell how often these incidents happen or whether or not black people are disproportionately impacted.
So we analyzed data from the Centers for Disease Control, which suggests potentially troubling trends. An estimated 1.4 million people were hospitalized from 2001 to 2018 due to legal intervention. That's when authorities try to make an arrest or do something like fire tear gas at protesters. This includes about 61 injuries out of every 100,000 black people in the U.S., compared to 13 out of every 100,000 white people. But the CDC also doesn't know the race for nearly a third of those involved, so it doesn't calculate rates of injury by race. But even if we assume that all unknown patients were white, black people are still at least 2.3 times more likely than whites to be injured and sent to the hospital by legal intervention.
We have to know the trends. We have to know which agencies are performing, better or worse than others.
Criminologist Justin Nix says the CDC data still leaves many unanswered questions, but some agencies may be motivated to keep the details under wraps.
Leaders are fearful of the data coming out and saying that their agency is on top of the list.
The FBI will make its first public data release later this summer, but so far, just 40% of the nation's sworn officers work at an agency that participated. 90% of the nation's police agencies do report to another voluntary FBI program, the Uniform Crime Report. One big difference? With crime stats, if agencies don't volunteer, they get shut off from key federal grants. That's not the case, we discovered, for the FBI's new use of force database.
It's bothersome to me that the FBI doesn't tie it to something, because basically what gets measured gets done.
The Harris County Sheriff's Office acknowledges never disciplining the officers involved in tasing Holman, but in response to questions from Newsy, said this week that going forward it will begin disclosing all use of force incidents to the FBI, effective as soon as possible. We will do so in the interest of transparency. The Pennsylvania State Police said they'll do the same by early next year.
I would advocate anytime a police officer puts his or her hands on somebody, that needs to be recorded. It needs to be understood, and it needs to be explained. It's not rocket science. It's good policing.
Mark Greenblatt, Newsy, outside Washington, D.C.
Next up, if you're missing going to the movies, we've got an alternative for you that's decades in the making.
Sure. Memes and cat videos are fun, but actual news might be a bit more useful. Follow Newsy on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get straightforward, opinion-free news right on your social news feed.
If you haven't had a chance to mindlessly scroll through Twitter's trending topics, let us get you caught up right quick. I honestly clutched my chest on this one, but don't worry, National Treasure James Earl Jones is alive and well. He's trending because of a discussion around voice actors playing roles that don't align with their race or ethnicity. It started with Jenny Slate announcing she was stepping down from her role on the animated show Big Mouth, where she plays a black girl.
Holy smoke!
Which led to responses like this. Yeah, James Earl Jones voiced a white-passing space wizard who had an issue with parenting.
I am your father.
But I think Jenny Slate's IG post in the matter explains why a white actor taking a black role from a black actor when black representation in media is so fraught is really a different kind of thing. She wrote, "Black characters on an animated show should be played by black people. In me playing Missy, I was engaging in an act of erasure of black people." It's a shoot I'm pretty sure no one asked for, but the Dior ones are here. This is a collaboration between the Jordan brand and the fashion house meant to be emblematic of absolute excellence. And Twitter has been going in on the look. It's a mixture of high-end fashion and sportswear that honestly doesn't slap, but do you? The summer movie season is off to a slow start for obvious reasons, but this week millions of people are experiencing a different kind of cinematic blockbuster from their couch with a controller in their hands. Newsy's Matt Pick looks at how video games have learned from movies and how movies have learned from video games. This is a fun one.
I'm leaving tomorrow.
Real-life theaters are grappling with a lean summer movie season. But video games are still rolling out their big blockbusters. The latest such AAA title is The Last of Us Part 2, a long-awaited follow-up to the critically acclaimed 2013 game about a zombie apocalypse. The Last of Us Part 2 features an ambitious narrative about a grand, grim, post-apocalyptic world, and like a lot of big-budget games, it often relies on cinema to tell its story. This is a sign of a bigger movement in technology and art. As games have become more realistic, and as movies have embraced more computer graphics, the two industries have started to converge on each other, for better and for worse. The developers behind The Last of Us have put a lot of focus on building empathy with the characters.
A chemical burn. I did it myself.
One tool for them to do this is the game's actors, real performers whose actions and emotions are translated into the game via special motion capture suits. Motion capture, or the process of translating an actor's movements and expressions onto a digital avatar, has become a common technique for movies and games alike. The same tech that's animating The Last of Us Part 2 is also being used to bring supervillains like Marvel's Thanos to life. But that technology actually has its roots in video games. One of the earliest motion capture studios was set up by video game maker Acclaim in 1995. Acclaim systems made it much easier for animators to use the data they were being given by the motion capture rigs. Those systems ended up being used by director Peter Jackson when it came time to animate a groundbreaking computer-generated character. Remington Scott was a director in Acclaim's motion capture studio, and brought that experience to the visual effects studio Weta Digital for their work on the Lord of the Rings franchise.
The system that we had was one in which Peter would be looking at a monitor and he talked to Gollum. It was, I think, for the first time, a director being able to talk directly to the digital character in real time and having that character respond.
So he doesn't have to do mocap on this now and some other things? This is the first time in the history of cinema this has ever been? I don't know.
We'll say yes.
We'll say yes.
Video games are still continuing to push the boundaries of this tech.
So what if I took a look around that car?
In 2011, Rockstar's team Bondi developed a new facial capture system for their detective game LA Noire, which required actors to sit perfectly still in front of an array of cameras. 5 years later, game developers were able to deliver a similar quality of facial animation during a live stage demonstration of Hellblade.
Do you want to build a snowman?
And big-name actors have taken notice. Modern games have featured nuanced performances from the likes of Ellen Page and Kevin Spacey.
The idea is that the more realistic that your digital characters can be, the more ability you have to reading nuances and subtleties in their performances. And that really creates the connection between yourself and that digital persona in a way that strengthens that engagement.
But it's not just about technology. Video games and movies are intertwined when it comes to narratives as well. When people started to want to tell stories in games, they first turned to movies to figure out how.
We can't settle for sticks and dots anymore. We're going to have script writers and scores. You have main characters and a villain and all the things that we traditionally see in film.
Full-motion video games started in the early 80s as an efficient way to tell stories with more polished visuals. Games like Dragon's Lair and Night Trap interspersed short movie clips in between segments of gameplay, rewarding players for their time and investment with a dose of cinema's finest acting.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
Using actual video eventually fell out of fashion as in-game graphics advanced. But the format still stuck around. Most games are still using non-interactive cutscenes to tell their stories.
There you are. You are here about the job.
And video games are inherently interactive. You can usually choose where you want your character to go and what you want them to do. But that freedom clashes with game designers who want to tell their story.
You stop that wagon!
A scripted dramatic Western showdown doesn't work if the player can't handle their horses. This tension leads developers to add more scripted sequences to their games, even outside of cutscenes. One popular trope is scripted sequences which give the player some agency, but keep them from straying too far from the correct path forward. Popular techniques like QuickTime events, where players progress by hitting a button or two when prompted, allow developers to keep control of their authored moments, while still giving players a scrap of interactivity during the game. Leaning too heavily on scripting can lead to pushback. While The Last of Us Part 2 has garnered largely positive reviews, several of the game's critics mention feeling like the game forces them to participate in its bloody revenge story, robbing them of agency in a supposedly interactive medium.
You remember me?
Ultimately, the convergence between video games and movies stems from a similar desire to tell stories. The developers for The Last of Us Part 2 have big storytelling ambitions, and films offer them proven techniques to achieve those goals, whether the players want to engage with them or not.
I'm going to take a minute to figure out where to buy a full-body motion capture suit, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter at Newsy in the Loop and let us know what you think, especially if what you think is something positive we can show to our boss.
As coronavirus spreads across the country, you might be looking for ways to make sense of it all. Newsy's here to help with some deeper context, explaining and reporting on the pandemic. Virology, only on Newsy. Be informed, not influenced.
Keeping things clean in a pandemic isn't easy or cheap. Then throw in a bunch of grade school kids and consider how much tougher good hygiene and sanitation is going to be. This is the problem facing schools as many prepare to reopen in the fall. It's not like these schools were flush with cash to begin with, and now dealing with new standards for cleanliness is cutting even further into funding. Amy Morona has the story.
Returning to the classroom this fall could come with a big price tag for school districts.
We don't know, what the first quarter of the fiscal year of 2021 will look like, but we know it'll probably look dramatically different than the first quarter of the 1920 fiscal year.
One estimate forecasts the average district could take on nearly $1.8 million in new expenses just to meet the CDC's safety recommendations. It says districts with about 3,600 students in 8 buildings would be looking at $448,000 for additional custodial staff, roughly $44,000 for school workers' masks, and about $39,000 for hand sanitizer in classrooms in the upcoming school year.
The nature of this pandemic has been that it is hitting every state. It is going to impact every school district across the country, and it's going to be a significant amount of money for them to be able to make up.
One way to close those gaps could be cuts.
School districts always have a range of tough choices to make when they're looking at reductions. Unfortunately, a lot of times that does fall in what some would consider extracurricular activities, either arts, music, drama, programs of that nature.
Districts typically get the bulk of their support at the state level, but those budgets are feeling the strain of the pandemic too. In an April letter to Congress, leaders from 76 of the country's biggest schools requested additional funding on top of what districts may have received in the CARES Relief Act earlier this year. They said an estimated 20% loss in state and local revenues would, quote, likely result in some 275,000 teachers being laid off in big city public school systems alone. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer told our sister station WXYZ that she wants more help from Washington.
We're pushing on them to step up and give us the support we need. Our kids are counting on us to get this right.
Lawmakers from both parties have indicated they're interested. House Democrats introduced a plan that would offer up $100 billion in grants and $30 billion in bonds for high-poverty schools. And Republican Senator Lamar Alexander said he'd support more federal funding for both K-12 schools and colleges to open safely this fall. Amy Morona, Newsy, Washington.
Here's a pretty dark transition. We're going from talking about school funding cuts to police getting shiny new military gear. What could go wrong?
We're gonna go deep.
We drove across the state to get here. We're working hard to get you the news you need.
We dig a little deeper on the stories of the day.
That's why we're here.
To help start making sense of it all.
Several cities saw U.S. military personnel roll in to assist local law enforcement during protests for racial justice. But noting the difference between those two groups might have been tough, partly because of a program that gives local law enforcement military equipment like this.
This Cougar MRAP is a tactical rescue vehicle that was acquired free of charge.
This bad boy was added to the fleet of the Moundsville Police Department in West Virginia, a town of less than 9,000 people. In this next story, we take a look at that program and the scrutiny being applied as more people call for police reform.
While authorities responded to protesters in Minneapolis, the police department of nearby Cottage Grove debuted its newest piece of equipment, an over $700,000 armored vehicle it had received for free. A police sergeant there told NPR the department received the mine-resistant vehicle through an initiative called the 1033 program.
The 1033 program is a program which allows local governments to be able to get stuff from the federal government free, or at least for at minimal, it would be $1 at most.
Dr. David Thomas is a 20-year veteran of the police force and now a professor of forensic studies at Florida Gulf Coast University. The Defense Logistics Agency, which runs the program, reports it's provided over 8,000 law enforcement agencies with $7.4 billion worth of equipment since the program began in 1997. Supporters say the program takes paid-for equipment that would otherwise collect dust at the Pentagon and gets it in the hands of police agencies that couldn't otherwise afford it. Agency officials argued in 2016 that there are people alive today who might have died if local law enforcement agencies didn't have equipment they got from the 1033 program on hand. And to be clear, it's not all armored vehicles. Thomas says it offers things like office supplies and rifles, as well as rocket launchers and helicopters. While military-grade equipment reportedly accounts for less than 1% of the agency's services, Thomas said there are very few roadblocks to receiving it.
All it really is a transfer. And so you're filling out a federal form saying that you need this equipment, and then the federal government, because it's surplus for the federal government and it's not being used. And so it's just a matter of doing a transfer, and we get the item.
It came under scrutiny in 2014 after images of police using military equipment on protesters were broadcast to the world. It led President Obama to change the program in 2015, requiring agencies to state why they needed the equipment and mandating proper training before requests would be granted. However, the Trump administration has reversed those changes. Then Attorney General Jeff Sessions wrote in a memo, "It is not the responsibility of the federal government to manage non-federal law enforcement agencies." At the time, he pointed to hurricane relief efforts in Texas as reason that the program was needed. Those rollbacks mean agencies can once again request any equipment they like. And Thomas says they don't always have a compelling reason.
To say I have this just because, and there's no reason for it, that scares me. I'm aware of tiny agencies in this country that have gotten some of this stuff, and they got it just because it was available. They didn't necessarily have a reason for it, but in the chief's eyes, the federal government is providing it, so we got it.
While Thomas says there can be good uses for the equipment, he said local agencies need to address the lack of training given to officers before using it.
If you're not mandating training and show that there's a specific need to have this stuff, then you're looking for literally what you've lined yourself up for is disaster ready to happen. I'll say this, I say it to recruits all the time, I say it to law enforcement all the time, that law enforcement without oversight is a very dangerous proposition.
For Newsy, I'm Josh Kransberg.
That's it for us. We're going to release you and let you go get your weekend started. We'll be back Monday with more In the Loop. Stick around for more top stories from Newsy right now.